Let's continue in Matthew chapter 24. After Jesus was asked these three questions, when would these things come to pass? Temple destruction. What would be the sign of your coming? Mark and Luke said the sign when these things would come to pass. Again, temple destruction. Jesus came, folks, when the temple was destroyed. That's how the disciples understood the discussion about the temple destruction. And what would be the sign and the end of the world, rather, and of the end of the world. And age is what the word world means. Not the end of time, not the end of the planet, not the end of earth, not even the end of the church, period. The end of the age. An age was ending when the temple was going to be destroyed, because that had been the Old Testament focus ever since God said, I'm taking you to a land where I can put my name there, when he took them out of Egypt. He then said these words that you have to understand in the context of who he's talking to, when this was spoken, and what it's being given in response to. Jesus said to them, take heed that no man deceive you. Now, when you read the word you, and you get in the mode that most prophecy teachers kind of put you in, you're thinking of you. That says you, and I'm reading it, so it must be me. But Jesus was talking to the people that asked him those questions. The ones that asked him, he was going to lead them up to the sign that they requested him about. The temple destruction was what that sign was all about. Remember, Mark and Luke said, what shall be the sign when these things, temple destruction, take place? So he's telling them, you, 2,000 years ago, people that are now long gone and dead, he said, take heed that no man deceive you. Now, if I was standing there and I asked Jesus three questions, and then he starts leading me up to the answers and providing me information and refers to me, I wouldn't be thinking of people 2,000 years from now after I'm dead and gone. Those disciples had to make sure no one deceived them. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. So false prophets were going to come. And he's leading up. He says this isn't the big one, though, but this is what's going to happen. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. Now, us in 2020, we get thinking, well, that's us. Look at all the wars and rumors of wars. Yeah, but he wasn't talking to us. He was talking to them. They personally would hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled. Them, 2,000 years ago. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. And that is what they were talking about, the end of the age. That's what they'd asked them about. For nation is going to rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in divers places. And he says, all these are the beginning of sorrows. Again, it's not the end of the age. And then they shall deliver you up to be afflicted. You. And then he says, many shall be offended and shall betray one another and shall hate one another. You see, a lot of them during that time were going to be so pressured by the Jews that they would give in so that they could get out of that suffering. But if they would do that, they would be destroyed with the rest of the unbelieving Jews. Many false prophets shall arise and deceive many, and because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. But he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. Notice that. He that shall endure unto the end of the age. That meant they were still going to be alive when this happened, because he's talking to them in particular. And then he makes a really powerful statement. This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. When you go to Colossians, notice the gospel would have to go to all nations, and then the end would come. Colossians 1, verses 5 and 6 tell us quite plainly that that happened by the time Paul wrote Colossians. It talks about the hope which is laid up for you in heaven, where you have heard before in the word of the truth of the gospel, which is come unto you as it is in all the world. Did you read that? Pick yourself off the floor from falling off your chair and look at it again. The gospel had come unto them, and it was in all the world by the time Colossians was written. And Jesus distinctly said, this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached to all nations, and then shall the end come. He's saying that had happened. And then when you go to verse 23, if you continue in the faith, grounded and settled, and be not moved away from the hope of the gospel, there he's mentioning it again, which you have heard, which was preached to every creature which is under heaven, whereof I, Paul, am made a minister. There it is again. Look at all these things we're showing you that it has to be talking about their day in the first century. Jesus said, Matthew 24:14, when the gospel goes to all the world, it's the then known world, folks. The then known world. When you go to Luke, you've got to understand the terms that the Bible uses. And you have to understand the context that the Jews and the listeners of that day would have understood these things. In Luke 2:1, it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. Now, did he tax Iceland? Did he tax Peru? Did he tax Japan? When we think of all the world, gospel goes to all the world, Mike, and then the end would come. It hasn't happened yet. Well, let's go to what they used the terminology as and how they used it to determine what Jesus meant for them to understand. It was always referring to the then known world, the Roman Empire. Remember, Rome was a world empire? Well, the world literally included nations and continents that Rome had nothing to do with, didn't even know existed. But yet it was called a Roman world empire. Well, that's because when they said all the world, that's what they meant. The then known world. And this is a perfect example of that. So Jesus was talking about things that came to pass in the first century. Double whammy on it all. He said, you. He said, ye. You're going to hear of these wars. You. None of them would think of thousands of years later, just as none of them would think to ask about what would happen thousands of years later, because when they heard Jesus talk about the temple destruction, unprecedented judgment, like wrath of God that was never before and never would be again, that was the wrath that would pour the judgment on the blood guiltiness from the time of Abel's death right through to the time of Zacharias. Jesus said that's going to come upon you religious leaders in Jerusalem. And then the disciples heard him say, your house is left unto you desolate, and they knew he meant the temple. And then they began talking about all of that and nothing else. Nothing. They didn't ask him about anything else about other than that context. And then when you analyze each thing carefully, he's not only saying you and ye, but then he's saying the end is going to come when the gospel's been preached to all the world, and then the end would come. That is clearly what Paul said was the case 2,000 years ago.